Hi, Dr. George James. Thank you for joining me today for this interview. Um, we're very grateful to having you, and I don't want to take too much of your time.
Glad to
Um,
be here. Thank you.
yeah, of course. So I think to start off with an introduction on who you are, kind of maybe what you do on campus, um, and then maybe off campus too.
Yeah, once again, my name is Dr. George James. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I've been practicing therapy for the past almost 19 years in just a short few months.
Mhm.
And, Villanova has been a part of my life ever since undergrad, and I've stayed connected ever since.
Mhm.
And so after I finished my undergrad, I got my master's and started practicing therapy. I stayed connected and engaged with Villanova, and probably I think going on like 11 years now, I've been doing life coaching through the CASA office, which is to help students of color and first generation students be able to talk through some things. Oftentimes, if they are dealing with significant things, it's in conjunction with the counseling center. But sometimes, before they might either get comfortable going to the counseling center, they might start with us, or it's a little bit where they just want someone to talk through some things. That's where we've been able to provide those services and to help support students just dealing with some of the things that happens in college, but also some things that go pretty intense after that.
Yeah, sounds like some great work, and I can definitely understand that that's needed for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so off campus, you run your own private practice, is that right?
It's a little bit of both. So off campus, I've been a part of an organization called Council for Relationships. They've been around, this is actually their 90th year that they've been in operation, helping individuals, couples, and families. Also through education, we have a postmaster's and we have a master's program connected with Thomas Jefferson University. So I've been there going on 19 years doing therapy, and I've done lots of different roles there. Privately, I have my own company called George Talks LLC, which allows me to consult and to coach and to work with people and to speak throughout the country and beyond. So I've been able to, consult with media companies. I've been able to speak places, write for a national magazine, appear on television in lots of different ways, and also to work with people. And that has been great and beneficial, and has allowed my work to expand even beyond this regional Philadelphia area.
Wow. Sounds like you're a very busy man for sure.
I can be, yes.
And yeah, again, thank you for getting the time out of your that very busy schedule to talk to me. So,
No,
um,
appreciate it.
do you have like a certain approach or philosophy to your work?
Yeah, there's a way that I do approach my work. I would say that on some level, I am not like follow these steps like one, two, three, four, but there is a philosophy and a way that I do think about it. I try to bring two ways of practice with anyone that I'm working with.
Mhm.
One is practical. So sometimes if I'm working with a couple, I might be saying, when's the last time you've been on a date night? If I'm working with an individual, or I know like we'll talk more about this, or an athlete, I might be talking about what are some of the thoughts and stories that are going on within your own mind and that you've been practicing. That's just, let's just practically talk about that.
Mhm.
Um, or let's write down those stories, or let's practice breathing. Those are the practical steps. So that's part or one aspect of what I do is a practical approach, and the other approach is more of a deep exploration. And so that might be, well, where did you learn those things? Let's talk about your family history. Let's talk about previous relationships or traumatic events or situations, and let's go deeper into those things and talk about it. So both practical and a deeper exploration. In addition to that, what I will say that also informs my work is that I'm pretty aware of things that influence, I think, everybody. Things like race, class, gender, sexual orientation, ability, faith, that those things somehow impact who we are, how we show up, what has meaning for us. And so I put all those things together, and also I try to acknowledge that there are narratives, stories that we all have
Mhm.
about ourselves and about life and about how we integrate. And if I'm an athlete and that's how I see myself and I get injured, what happens to the story that I have about myself and how I believe and operate in the world? So those are like my guiding philosophies for the work. And then when I'm doing it, it can it can be diverse and vary from session to session, person to person, situation to situation.
Yeah, I think that that sounds like a great kind of looking at the present and what's going on, and then looking at where that kind of stories come from. And I really like how you acknowledge how like there's also like the person or the couple or whoever you're with, and then there's everything else that they have to deal with also. Um, and I think that's a nice like holistic approach.
Yeah,
I
it
think
becomes important because sometimes when, there's a situation that happens, but then for me, for example, right, like, but also what does it mean for me to be a black man in a certain time in a certain space?
Mhm.
What did it mean for me to be on campus, and how did I navigate that? I navigated that differently than a different black man or a white woman or someone from Indian descent, right? So there's all these factors that also just shape how we are and how we show up.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of goes into the next questions I have. Every My Matters wanted to ask you about the intersectionality between mental health and the Black community. Um, how would you describe the kind of stigma of mental health that you've grown up with um, throughout your childhood?
Yeah, I love, first of all, I love intersectionality in terms of thinking about the ways that when multiple things intersect and it could increase the level of um, isms or injustice that one experiences, especially like talked about like Kimberly Crenshaw, which I actually first learned about Kimberly Crenshaw, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, through my wife, who was in public health, and some of that work started there. Uh, as it relates to myself and mental health, I started off at Villanova wanting to be a bio major, and it wasn't until the end of my sophomore year where I switched to psychology, and I still didn't know what that meant or what I was going to do with it. And as I moved further, thinking about therapy, that was something I didn't even know of. I didn't even know what a therapist was at that point in my life. That wasn't something that was talked about. That was something that was in my community. That wasn't something that was anywhere, right? And so that talks about not only the stigma, but just the absence, the silence that was there. And I wasn't sure, like, I know what a medical doctor was, and we had examples of those, right? Because there was someone that was a childhood friend, and I could say I wanted to be someone like that person. And so when I decided, I wasn't sure how my parents would see it or perceive it. I'm grateful that they just were supportive, but I know lots of folks and students, they're not sure of like, can they pursue things that are different than what their family might be aware of. And then in addition to that, I didn't necessarily have any examples that I could say, I want to be a therapist like this person. There wasn't necessarily a therapist on TV that looked like me or was from my community. And for me, I blend, being a Black man born in this country with parents and family from Jamaica, right? So I'm a Jamaican American, like born in this country, lived an American life, but also lived a very Jamaican experience through my parents and my family. So blending all of that, mental health wasn't talked about. I also grew up Christian in the church. Mental health wasn't really talked about. It was more about prayer, which I still value and believe in, but there wasn't much about talking to someone. Fast forward today, I'm very grateful that that narrative has shifted and continues to shift. I hear more people talking about also having a therapist in prayer. Also, I see it more on television of Black folks, people of color people of different backgrounds talking about the importance of mental health. So I've definitely seen the shift. I still think there's more that needs to happen,
Mhm.
but it's totally different than what I saw growing up.
And that kind of follows into my next question was going to be, how do you think that's changed since your childhood? Um, but it sounds like and move in the right direction. Um, and I can definitely kind of resonate with the change that I've seen, even just starting in undergrad over the last 5 years, like that acknowledgement of how important that mental health is, especially in the student athlete community. Um, and slowly but surely, we're getting more and more resources and more awareness, and more conversation about it too. Um,
It's huge. I think it's shifted. Like I recently got into watching a new TV show called Grand Crew on NBC,
mhm,
and like episode number 4 was what, and it's a black cast, primarily black cast, talking about their experiences. They're coining it like the new friends, right? And but they talk about therapy, and there's like jokes around therapy. There's or around what it means to open up and share and be vulnerable, but they're also very transparent about the importance of it. Like this is mainstream, like television, and they're talking about it. And and to your point, right, we've also seen more pockets where mental health wasn't talked about. So whether it be the Black community, whether it be a Caribbean community, whether it be spiritual community, whether it be an athletic community, we're
mhm,
seeing that more and more. With the Winter Olympics just coming to an end, we even heard some discussions there. The Summer Olympics, we heard lots of that, and so we're hearing it on the highest levels, and then we're also hearing it throughout professional, collegiate, high school, even before that. How are people navigating anxiety? How are people dealing with things? How are people doing with burnout? You
yeah,
know, um, Simone Manuel, as I know you mentioned swimming and diving, like, how she talked about her struggle and over, um, you know, practicing and all that she went through. Michael Phelps, right? Like, so there's just all these names, even as most recently as, uh, Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka, and then also folks in other sports. So I just think that it's happening more. The
yeah.
discussion is there, and hopefully we continue to make that just a value, that our mental health is valuable across the board, across the sector, across the group that you might particularly belong to.
Yeah. And I definitely think it's important too to see more people who look like you, or who have kind of been through a similar experience to you, for you to then kind of um, identify with, and see those connections, that it's okay if they're doing it, then it's okay for me to go through this too, and for me to need to reach out for help when needed. So I definitely agree with everything that you just said, for sure. Um, do you notice any difference in your clients depending on their background or their culture?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see a difference depending on background or culture. I think there's a lot of overlap, right? And so, well, just in my work, I've been fortunate enough to work from those who are like incarcerated, and I worked in the jails with folks, those who are in halfway homes, all the way to those in CEOs who are CEOs and multi-million dollar homes, to even not that recently multimillionaires almost and billionaires that I've been able to work with. So like class wise, gender wise, sexual orientation, faith, ability, like, and then when we talk about racially, I've had the privilege of working with people just across the board, with different backgrounds. And yeah, there's some differences, right? There's some ways that people resonate, and the language that they might use, right? Just maybe even terms that they might feel like they're able to share, right? Like when I might say like to a client, for the most part, like a African American client, and I might say like, like, oh, it sounds like so and so was tripping, right? Like there's a way that like the conversation might be a little bit different. Uh, but at the same time, there's crossover, right? Like there are clients that I'm able to talk sports with, right? And that, using sports analogies, right? Whether I'm using, I'm talking about, especially in this area, if I'm talking about the Eagles or use an example, or that clients are able to see those comparisons with themselves. And then with athletes and entertainers, being able to let them know that I've worked with other athletes and entertainers, and that also makes a difference for them too. It's like, oh, okay, you maybe get it, or you get me, and you understand a little bit more of me, because being an athlete is a different experience. Being a college athlete, a student athlete, is a different experience. All right, like most students, yes, are working hard, but to say I've also got in my practice already and I'm about to go to class, and then I got another practice later on today, or I got to have an away game, or those are things that most students don't have to navigate, and that you have to show up, especially if you're on scholarship, or even just trying to get on the squad or the team, or the program. So there's a lots of things that sometimes people don't know or understand, but because of my experiences with other clients, because of my experiences, for now doing this for some time, I'm able to relate to people, and I think help them feel comfortable to share their story. And when they start sharing their story, it can sound very similar. A student athlete can feel family pressure, just like as another student can feel family pressure, and they know to be a medical doctor and not sure what to do. And that intensity can be the same, just different details.
Yeah. And I know that's something that our student athletes have definitely kind of voiced, is that it takes another level of therapist, or someone that's willing to reach out and offer help to truly understand the student athlete lifestyle and commitment, and kind of extra level and extra things they have to think about on a daily basis. Which is why we're trying to do what we're trying to do here, to provide that extra level of help that many people don't get or understand, or even know that it's a thing. that student athletes have this whole other bit to think about.
It
So yeah.
is. I think student athletes have to go through a lot, and yes, sometimes it can be seen as like, oh, they either have it easy, or and once again, like, I think even the narrative around student athletes, right? I think like the thought of like a student athlete is not smart, or is not a student, is just an athlete, is also like not fair, and I think more people have really fought to push against that. So you're talking about someone who is studying, who is doing the work, who is showing up to class, who does care about their academics, but also cares about performance, about nutrition, about strength and conditioning, about all these aspects that makes them better on whatever sport that they are participating in.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree. Um, so moving on to my next question. Would you say the Black community is more or less likely to seek mental health support?
I think historically the Black community has been less likely to seek mental health support, um, in a traditional format.
Mhm.
I think that in the Black community, people would seek support by talking to friends, talking to family,
Yeah.
and a lot, maybe even talking to a religious leader, whether that be traditionally, whether in the Christian faith or Muslim faith. Um, just looking at demographics, there are Black folks who would identify as Jewish, but that's always been a smaller number. But that people would go to faith leaders.
Mhm.
And I think over time, what we've seen is the narrative is that it is okay to have someone impartial, someone that you can trust, someone that you can just say what you're thinking and feeling and going through, and leave, and not have to worry about uh, what that next interaction is going to be like, when you run into that person, or if that person is going to share your information with anyone. I think some of the struggle has been, what happens when I share? Where does that information go? Are you going to use this, to just harm me in some way? And I think more people have been able to say, oh, no, this is what they're supposed to do. It's held confidential. I mean, there are lots of times I would want to just, share like who I'm working with, but I don't like my own family does
Yeah.
not know the people that I work with because I take that very seriously, that people's confidentiality and privacy is protected. And
Mhm.
so I think like that's been a huge thing of people, especially folks in the Black community, being able to know that. And then I think access, right? There's some people where, how do I get a therapist? You know, where do I go to find a therapist? That's also one of the areas of like why life coaching has been so valuable, is that we're just right there. We're just integrated in the program, and that we're like, oh, we're just another thing you can do. You can get a tutor and you can get a life coach. And then that, I think, opens the door to say, oh, if I have a life coach, maybe I can go to the counseling center. Now it just makes sense. It's almost like a bridge to this next phase for them. And I think that that's just, you know, really helpful overall, where more folks in the Black community, I think, is finding ways and access. And then, you know, the other part is, you know, some places financially, can I afford a therapist? Or how do I put money aside to do that? Or do I have insurance to do that? So, you know, all those parts I think are becoming better, and more people are making that adjustment for themselves to
Mhm.
use those services.
Yeah. It's kind of like just creating a pathway of that, depending on who you're working with or depending on where you are, um, creating that pathway to accessibility, like you said, um, and being able to change that depending on who you're working with.
Yeah,
I guess.
like even you know what you and your fellow student athletes are doing, right, is also providing access. So what's a safe space for me on campus to talk about some of the things I feel, whether it's anxiety, whether it's burnout, whether it's not about sports, it's about academics or family, or whether it's not about those things and it's about but athletics, and but it's some place that I can talk. And then someone might say, you know, maybe you should go talk to the counselor, or maybe talk to this counselor, they get
Mhm.
it. Or maybe here's a referral outside. All of a sudden that becomes a pathway and provides access.
Yeah, yeah, and it's definitely something that I kind of feel in the student athlete community that maybe reaching out, definitely in the past I've seen it as reaching out is a sign of weakness, that there's something that's not quite going right for you, and therefore you have to admit that you have a weakness. And then that's the kind of the same thing of you were saying, of if people worrying about, all right, who's going to hear about this, who's going to use this to hurt me or harm me in some way. But I'm hoping that that's changing, and I can feel that kind of change progressing. But like you said before, it's definitely something that needs to keep going and keep spiraling to get bigger and a wider message for sure.
I definitely think it is growing and changing. I think the challenge is that, you know, in the past, I would see people self-destruct, right?
Mhm.
Like they don't want to share it or talk about it or open it up to anyone. And they're now drinking more or doing other things or not performing at the level that they are capable of.
Mhm.
And coach or coaches or teammates or others around them might not know that they're struggling with something, and or they could get to a place where they really do things that are just not really good for them and end up really harming their career or their future. And so I think that's why it's so important, you know, like, you know, performance. And there's a difference also, right? Like I think, in especially when we talk about sports and athletics, there's a difference in my mind between a performance psychologist or performance coach who is really helping you sometimes get in the zone or get out of your head in some way. And there's another aspect of like what is happening in your romantic relationship that you don't talk about, but that is really impacting your why your mind is clouded and why you can't focus.
Yeah.
They're related, but they're two different things. And I think that's also how I see how more athletes and student athletes are sharing that there's a lot going on in my life that most people don't know about. And
Yeah.
that if I have a place where I can discuss and share that and have tools and resources for that, then I can just focus on what I love to do.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I can definitely resonate with that one. It's feel like I'm doing a million things at once all the time. And I know I'm not alone in thinking that either.
Not at all.
Um, how do you think societal issues have shaped mental health within the Black community?
Yeah, you know, I think that and it's like almost like a targeted approach, but I don't think this is what happened. When you start to just have people in the Black community talk about mental health, um, and it becomes normal for these conversations.
Mhm,
I've seen more churches, more faith leaders
mhm,
talk, more mosque, more like more folks just say and just integrate therapy and therapists in their messaging, in their resources. Then when you see on TV, there is now like almost, I think, just multiple TV shows where a therapist is somewhere there. Sometimes in ways I don't like, right? They're always making like where the therapist might do something that's not great, but there's a therapist. I mean, even going back to like The Sopranos, right? Like that,
mhm.
and other places, there are ways that there's a therapist that becomes integrated, and a therapist who works with people on who are high achievers, who are athletes, who are entertainers. And then, you see stuff in sports, right? Where many years, well, some years ago, Ron Artest, now Meta World Peace, like wins a championship. And he's like, I want to thank my therapist, right? Like that's something that he puts out there. And then you have athletes now who are openly talking about their journey. Um, Regionally in football, we've had players on the Eagles talk about their struggle with anxiety and that they're getting help and support. We've had national figures who are saying that they've had some struggles and that they've also gotten support, and then are now endorsing and supporting mental health initiatives.
Mhm,
So I think who are people of color. And so when you see that, when you see in the faith place, when you see people who are in the highest level, like in the Olympics, and talking about those things, and then now talking about their affiliation with mental health support, and you have professional sports individuals, I think you start to hear it in lots of different ways. And then all of a sudden you hear that, oh, your mother or your father, or your cousin or your brother also got received some help and support.
mhm,
I think that tells someone, especially those in the Black community, that it's like, you know what, maybe it's okay that I try this. Last thing I'll say, I did a talk with a big company, and it was mainly for some of the Black men in this company. And I did a small group at this one time of like maybe about 12 Black men high up in the company doing great things,
mhm,
very smart. And when we started talking about therapy, about 10 of them said they've already been to therapy or actively in therapy.
mhm,
And then the other two, by just looking at everybody else, said, you know what, I need to get me a therapist right away.
mhm,
Right. So we're saying at the end of this, it was going to be 12 out of 12
mhm.
Black men who were either in therapy or previously in therapy, currently in therapy, or about to start therapy. When I first started 19 years ago, if it was 12 Black men, it might have been two or three, if that.
Yeah, yeah. And that's like what we've been talking about, right? Starting that conversation and awareness can, like you just said, can completely change a mindset for sure. Um, do you think being part of a predominantly white institution influences the way mental health or a mindset might be of either a black student or black student athlete specifically?
Going back to when I mentioned like how I practice,
Mhm,
thinking about things like race, class, gender, sexual orientation, ability, um, those are just some of the areas that, are there. Culture, that those are things that we don't often think about
mhm,
that can be of impact, right? So if you are someone of color and you've been around other people of color and now you come to a predominantly white institution, what does that mean for you? How do you integrate? Is homesickness a little bit more intense for you because this is really a new place? Or
mhm,
maybe you're sort of used to it and you get adjusted, but what happens when there is a racial injustice that you experience or someone experience? And it's not like if, it's a guarantee that it's going to be a win at some point, right, in those situations. Or
mhm,
what happens when there's things outside and now you want to say something about it, but you realize your friends are not? Or even a situation, I have a client where his son goes to Clemson, and he's been connected. He's a Black uh, man, student of color, but he has predominantly like white friends. his father worries because will they be out drinking one day, and they do or say something to his son and he can't do anything about it, right? Just feeling a sense of powerlessness. So this worry and stress and anxiety that's there because injustice does happen. It's not a guarantee that his friends are going to do something to him, right? But it's the thought of there are stories where that has happened. So I think that the level of anxiety, worry, intensity can happen for folks and students of color when they're at a predominantly white institution, especially if there are not resources and services that are provided for them. And I
Mhm.
think that goes not only for like Black students, but going to our conversation about student athletes. What happens when I'm on campus as a student athlete and I'm only seen as a product? If I'm only seen as someone to produce, but not seen as a human being, not seen as a student, not seen as a son or daughter or a brother or sister, like what happens if that part of me is not acknowledged? And we know from in the past that always wasn't acknowledged.
Yeah.
And so I say at this very similar thing of when there are resources, where there is acknowledgement, when there is a pathway and access, it it helps people to deal with some of those things that come up when you're in a new setting
Mhm.
and maybe overwhelmed by it. Something that might feel comfortable hanging out with your friends or talking a certain way that you can't do anymore because you're in a new environment.
Yeah. Um, such great words. I was just like fixated on everything that you were saying just then. But yeah, I mean, like everything else you said, it's just such a powerful message to um, think of people not only as performers and athletes, but that extra level of right, what else is everyone else dealing with, and maybe it's not just about the performance anxiety or the pressure of stepping up on the field and having to perform at our best, but also everything else to do with your background, to do with your culture, to do with your race, gender, sexuality, all those kind of things that could possibly create issues for you or problems, and just being able to acknowledge them and being like, okay, those are also parts of you too, and we want to recognize that. Um, I think is definitely a message that we're trying to create and foster to grow a little bigger and more resonate more with people, rather than just having student athletes as student athletes. The title is not just who you are, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No, it does. I think that's really great and powerful, which is also what I love, that I was a student at Villanova and I wasn't an athlete, a student at Villanova, but I knew many, and one of my roommates was a student athlete. And I know, this group and this entity wasn't there,
Mhm.
right? So there is hope always for the future,
Yeah.
evolution, and that the group, that this group and service and community is there now. And
Mhm.
so 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it might be an even bigger part and more further integrated, and more people can be helped and supported.
Mhm.
That's sometimes what we can hope for.
Yeah, that's definitely our hope for sure. Um, so just kind of to bring this all together after this incredible interview, I just say, and thank you very much for everything. Um, do you have any kind of advice, or is there anything that you'd um or any like kind of leading message that you'd want to give to the student athlete community, the Black student athlete community, or just as from a mental health point, mental health professional, that we can send to our student athlete community?
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to share kind of two different messages. One is for those maybe like yourself who are student athletes, and you also realize that you want to help other student athletes
Mhm.
in whatever way. Maybe it's you want to be a therapist or clinician. Maybe is you want to set up some other service or business along the way. I want to encourage you that it is needed and it is valuable. Your voice, your thoughts, your experience is the exact thing that can make a difference for other student athletes. This group, this community is making a difference because it is there on campus. It
Mhm.
is something that whether people are fully participating in or not, is saying it's okay and we have a space for you. And that could be the same thing you do in your future and in your career. And I have been fortunate and blessed that I've been able to do that as a part of my career. Like even now, I recently started a podcast where we focus on leaders, entertainers, athletes, and performers, and being able to help people and inspire people just through this podcast has been amazing. And so I'm saying that to say, if you're interested in continuing to help people or to find a way to help people, go for it.
Mhm.
Yes, you can find a way to make money. Yes, you can find a way to impact people, but mostly you can make a difference working with student athletes, and even others as you move forward. Message one.
Thank
Message two, for student athletes who are on campus, you have to might deal with lots of things. And if you're a Black student athlete or a student athlete of color, you might have to deal with, like, how do I navigate everything at a predominantly white institution? How do I continue to be myself while also evolve and connect? How do I perform? There's lots of things. You might even have pressure at home, or with family or community, especially if you're there as a student athlete. There's a lot that is already expected of you. That's how you got there in the first place. And to know that there is nothing wrong with having some support, having somebody in your corner who can help encourage you and even challenge you in your emotional and mental well-being. And my belief is that if you also take care of your emotional and mental well-being, just like you're taking care of your body, just like you're taking care of your academics, just like you're showing up for practice and for events and games, you put yourself in the best position to be your best self. And but don't minimize why it's important to have somebody there for you. And
Mhm.
so that is my encouragement to Black student athletes, to student athletes in general, and to just the overall community of that. When you are doing multiple things like this, like being a student at Villanova, which commands a lot, and an athlete at Villanova, which also commands a lot,
Mhm.
it's important that you have some place where you feel safe and you can talk to somebody.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And we'll be sure to link your information, and all the great work that you've done, along with this video. But I want to just say thank you so much for finding some time to talk with me. I know that a lot of people will benefit from this for sure. Um, and I'm just in awe of everything that you do at this point in time.
Thank you. It's a privilege and honor anytime anything connected to Villanova, but also to talk about the work that I do. And I'm passionate about it, and I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had and opportunities to come. And I appreciate this opportunity to share with you. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Every Mind Matters wanted to share some statistics about the intersectionality of mental health in the Black community to show you why this discussion is so important for Black History Month and in general. 16% of Black and African American individuals in the United States report having a mental illness, and this comes out to about 4.8 million people. While this number is high, it can be seen that within 2015 and 2018, the number or percentage of major depressive episodes has actually been increasing from about 9.0 to 10.3% in youth, 6.1 to 9.4% in young adults, and even 5.7 to 6.3% for adults ages 26 to 49. It can also be seen that these mental disorders and illnesses can impact Black and white communities differently, as Black and African American teenagers have a higher rate of attempted suicide than white teenagers. Finally, less than 2% of the American Psychological Association, or APA, members are Black or African American as of 2017, demonstrating the lack of representation for very important panels related to mental health and diagnoses. By demonstrating a few statistics related to mental health in the Black community, we hope to give light to an area that is of significant importance and do our part to help lessen the disparities seen above.
If you need any additional support, please reach out to the resources listed here. Dr. Neff is our student athlete specialist and can be reached through the Counseling Center. Alternatively, if you'd like more information, please follow or message our Instagram account at everymindmatters.unitas. We look forward to hearing from you. Go Cats!